Welcome back to another episode of the Samong and Nate Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Samong and Nate, joined by Nate. And in this episode, you might notice, if you're watching on YouTube at least, you might notice a little bit of a change in the studio. And that is because this buck right here is now off the wall and on our table. And this buck right here is what we're talking about in this episode. So we're going to be talking about high country mule deer hunting, and specifically here in Washington, because that's what we've done for the most part. Because when you talk about high country mule deer hunting, it's an expansive world, and there's all types of different high country hunts all over the West. But with what Nate and I have done, we primarily focused on Washington, so that's where we're going to really cater down to in this video. But before we get into that, we want to share our gratitude to those that support us and make this possible.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our sponsors is Onyx Hunt. This is just an incredible hunting platform. It's a mapping platform, and it is a great tool, a necessary tool for modern day hunters. It shows all the normal things like public and private land boundaries. It shows things like recent forest fires. And then in addition, you have a ton of extra resources if you sign up for the Onyx Elite membership. You get access to Hunting Fool. You get access to some beta type programming that they're working on with some slope angles and slope directions and ways to really narrow down the area that you're looking for animals in.
That's right, and use code SY20 on your Onyx subscription. Another one, longtime partner of ours, Vortex Optics. Doesn't matter if you're a beginner or a seasoned hunter. Rifle scopes, they've got you covered from many thousands of dollars to a couple $100 depending on your budget. And we've used Vortex because they've just been part of the ride, and we've never had anything to complain about them. So you can buy Vortex Optics almost anywhere you look, but if you want to save 10% off of Vortex Optics, eurooptic.com. Use code SY10 at checkout.
And the last partner we want to thank is Tacticam. This is a trail cam that we have both been using for multiple years. And when you talk about consistency killing, when you get to check your trail cam photos on a daily basis rather than maybe a biannual or less often basis, it is a game changer. You don't have to go in and disturb the environment that you're trying to watch these animals in, and you get to keep up to date with your animals, which is a pretty fun aspect of hunting, if I do say so myself.
That's right. So with that said, before we jump into the bread and butter of this podcast, we're going to play some Trivia Duel. And if you're new, Trivia Duel is simply I ask Nate a question, he has to answer it right, vice versa. So with that said, I would be very surprised if you knew my question. This one comes out of left field. And so, maybe you'll color me surprised. This is not a multiple choice question.
Oh boy.
So this is just, if you know, you know. Who is William Cody, a.k.a. I didn't finish my question, but he's laughing. Who is William Cody, a.k.a. Buffalo Bill?
No way.
See, you didn't let me finish my question. You might have known.
Do you know I have an original tin type of Buffalo Bill, as I am one of his direct nephews, 5 or 6 generations down.
What? Okay, folks. This is completely out of left field for me.
Yeah, this is not planned. No.
Is this the actual William Cody Buffalo Bill?
I never knew his name was William Cody. But yeah, on my mom's side, we are direct relatives of Buffalo Bill, and we have like original stuff from him from the 1800s.
Folks, but I am mind blown.
But give us a lowdown on Buffalo Bill. What do you have?
So do you know him, or do you just?
Yeah. So he was, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't he a traveling? What's the word? Kind of like a cowboy, a cattle wrangler type thing, and he would go around on like a circuit, right? It was more of a show thing.
Yes, and there's more to it. He actually apparently he had like a show, but he's really famous for the fact that, granted his name, he killed a lot of bison.
Huh.
So William Cody, he's nicknamed as Buffalo Bill because he went around and he killed, in a span of about 18 months, he killed nearly 4,300 bison, which largely contributed to the near extinction of the species. And the reason why he did this was to feed the workers who were working on the railroads at that time in like the 1800s or whenever he was around. And not only that, but he was also a scout for the U.S. Army, and he would go in and he would scalp the Native Americans. Like, he was just not a very nice person. And
So that whole thing I was talking about us being related, that's not true.
yes, don't dig any deeper. But anyway, because he was, back during that time, it was like we're trying to, they were trying to develop essentially. And so in this case, it was like the railroads. That's what the main thing was. But because the bison itself was such a large piece of the Native American tribes, I mean, they literally needed bison for food, for clothing, other necessities. And then you have Mr. Cody here show up and just wipe away all the bison. I mean, he caused a lot of harm to the Native American tribes around this time. And so hence the name Buffalo Bill.
Wow, that's more than I ever knew about him.
Yeah, and you gave me a lot more than I knew too.
Well, moving on, my question for you, I reached out to our buddy Matt with Cascade Pack Goats.
Okay.
So we are going down the pack goat train here because I don't know much about pack goats, although maybe in the future we may know more. But since we're going to be talking about high country, and I think with our experiences, both of us have determined that pack goats are the ultimate high country pack animal. Here's what I got for you. What percentage of their body weight can a well-conditioned pack goat carry?
What percentage of their body weight?
Yep.
So an average pack goat, according to my limited knowledge, probably weighs about 60, 70 pounds, if I had to guess. I'm going to say 100%. They can pack out their own body weight.
The answer overall is wrong, but the number is fairly correct. This blew my mind. Okay, you ready for this?
Okay.
So Milo is one of Matt's goats.
Okay.
This is his biggest male goat. He weighs 200 pounds.
Huh?
His pack goat weighs 200 pounds.
Am I thinking of a different species here?
However, he can carry, when he's well conditioned, 25 to 30% of his body weight. So he can carry right around the ballpark of 50 pounds.
I don't think I have ever imagined a pack goat being 200 pounds. Am I like completely misjudging a pack goat?
I think they are must just be extremely dense muscle. At least Milo is. Milo's jacked.
Matt, whatever you're doing to that goat, give me his workout routine. No, that's like, because I remember, like, I always see people with the pack goat. They can literally go and just pick them up.
Yeah, I don't know. So if Cascade Pack Goats, this guy, they live over in Enumclaw. Matt's got 6 goats, and he's a really fun guy to follow on social media. He posts about his goats and stuff at Cascade Pack Goats. Anyways, just recently he was out doing a forest hike with him. I don't know if you saw this, but one of his goats slipped off a log in some deadfall and got into an area, and he could absolutely not pick the goat up. He had to actually kind of help cut a way out to get this pack goat up and get him out of this area of deadfall because there was no moving that goat. That goat was dense and muscular.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm definitely misjudging how heavy these goats are.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they can still carry 50 pounds well conditioned.
I mean,
or 25 to 30% of their body weight.
I mean, 50 pounds, that's a load.
That's a ton of weight.
I mean, that's essentially our packs when we pack in.
Yeah, almost.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's incredible. Goes to a point. I think pack goats are the MVPs of backcountry hunting.
Absolutely. Let's talk about backcountry, high country hunting, high country buck, all of that.
Oh, yeah. This is a fun podcast, folks, because this is one of the few hunts. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love hunting. I mean, as many of you know. But when I see in my calendar a high country deer hunt, I'm like, like circling it. I'm like, that's the hunt that I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. So today we're going to tell the story of this deer here. Arguably my favorite hunt that I've done to date. Definitely probably my most memorable hunt. The first big hunt Samong and I did together back in 2021. And this was a Washington high country deer hunt. Washington has a season every year from the 15th to the 25th of September. It's a modern rifle high country season. There's Wilderness areas open throughout Washington, mostly through that central band of Cascade Mountains throughout the state. And it's a great hunt. So we're going to talk a little bit about the hunt. We're going to go through it, and then we're going to talk about some of those things that we learned back in 2021 to hopefully help some of you that maybe haven't done the high country hunt yet or don't know what to expect, or some of you guys that maybe have done it and can share in some of these discoveries that we had and relate a little bit.
Yeah, I think in this podcast, we're going to be kind of jumping around from perspective. So when we start, we're going to start in from the perspective of where we were at in 2021. No experience with a high country hunt, kind of like what we were expecting, what we've heard, and then ultimately what we actually learned. And then at the end of it, looking back at it, what we did right, what we did wrong, what we should have done, and then ultimately going forward, what we should do in the future or what we will do in the future. Before we go into any of that stuff, we're going to talk about the story of this deer that Nate took in 2021.
We've touched on this hunt partly because it was just such a monumental hunt for us. We've touched on it in other podcasts here and there so far, but this was our first high country hunt together. This was my first high country hunt I'd ever done. I had done a ton of backpacking, round trip backpacking through different wilderness areas in Washington. So I wasn't completely naive to the backcountry experience, you may call it, prior to this hunt. However, I was naive to how that worked in a hunting world. And there was definitely lessons learned. However, I remember I brought this hunt up to Samong that spring, actually later that spring, after spring turkey, and I said, hey, I'm thinking about doing this high country hunt for deer in September. What do you think? Do you want to join? And Samong was like, let's do it. I don't have anything on the calendar. Let's plan it. And we kind of went through, and I had a spot picked out, and he just kind of went with the flow, and we got ourselves into one heck of an experience. Now, at the time, my expectations were we were going to go into this beautiful backcountry with amazing weather and see big bucks running around everywhere because nobody does this hunt. But those were not quite the accurate expectations.
Those were Nate's expectations. My expectations were 0 deer, 0 bucks, total butt kicking, terrible weather, everything terrible, polar opposite of Nate. Those were my legitimate expectations prior to going to that hunt.
So the hunt comes, we get up there, and we hiked in opening day, and we had a little bit of hike prior to actually entering into the wilderness area. And so it was interesting because I had never started from a trailhead that was maybe a more general trailhead to general hiking. And that in itself within Washington was a really interesting experience.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, the context is during that time of the year, September, it is like peak hiking season because the woods are colorful, leaves are changing colors, and the Pacific Crest Trail is simply just one of the most, if not the most popular hiking trail in the Western United States, right? Mm-hmm. And even though that's the main one, there's just various other trails that divert from it or are around it.
It's a huge access point to a lot of the trail systems throughout the Cascades, and especially for, not just people hiking the formal Pacific Crest Trail, but as fires come through and as forest crews do different projects, they will shut down parts of the Pacific Crest Trail and create roundabouts through the kind of, fishnet of trail systems that surround it.
Yes, let's just say that when we got there were a lot of vehicles parked, and we saw probably 2 cars that were hunters out of the like 30 or 40 cars we saw driving up there.
Yeah, so that was shock number 1 of endless shocks that we had during that trip. But, because we hadn't done it before, we didn't really know what to expect, so we kind of just shrugged our shoulders and went in. And in reality, a lot of those people dissipated fairly quickly as we pushed in just a little bit farther. But day 1 was just stuck into my memory bank. I remember hiking up over this little berm and kind of getting our first look into this wilderness area that we were going to go hunt, and just being blown away by everything, the magnitude of the hillsides, the size of the peaks, the snow-capped mountains, the fall colors. It was a postcard in front of us, and we
Yeah.
got to go hunt it.
Yeah, I remember hiking up there, and I'm like, before we even got to the spine of the ridge, I was already dying.
It was a cold day when we got there. In fact,
Okay.
it was snowing. And so at the truck, we had put on all of our puffies. We had put on our rain jacket, and probably 150 yards from the truck, we had our backpacks off, our rain jackets off, our puffies off, kind of huffing and puffing. And
Yeah, I remember that first 150-yard stretch to get up and over. I was already like, I don't know how I'm going to survive this, because the context is I have never done a true backcountry hunt up until this point, or that point in my life. So like everything was just new. I mean, I could tell my body has never experienced something like that. Packing, like, I mean, back then we were kind of a noob. We were noobs. And so we packed extra stuff, which my pack was probably like 70 pounds. And we both packed in our own rifles, which it's not necessarily always a bad thing. But clearly, like, my body was just not in tune with what we were about to do.
yeah. So beautiful entry to the hunt. Already kind of new experiences. We hiked in, and because we were getting our butts kicked a little, we were taking it pretty slow and taking spots along the trail to stop and look. And we also had absolutely no idea where we would see animals at. And so our starting strategy was to just glass everything from the very, very bottom of the drainage to the very top, completely rocked out, cliffy areas of the peaks. And surprisingly enough, probably 45 minutes into our hike, we stopped and kind of popped up along the trail, and we took out our binos, and Samong spotted a deer almost immediately.
Yeah, because prior to going this hunt, again, this is my first high country hunt, but we're hunting mule deer, which is something I've grown up hunting. So it's like, even though we're hunting different area, it's like this, it's still the same animal. I'm still looking out for the same features, in this case, a white rump. And so when we were hunting, I mean, we're glassing. The far mountainside is about 2 miles as the crow flies.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a little knob in between us, and I looked into that little pocket. It was a shady pocket. And I saw a white rump, and immediately I'm like, oh, that's a deer.
Yeah.
Granted, it eventually turned out to be a doe and a fawn.
Mm-hmm.
But even just seeing a deer when we had no idea, no starting point, no prior knowledge, nothing, no context to the hunt, it was such a relief, because it's like, okay, I can at least glass up a deer, which
Yeah.
is a huge improvement over what we just came from.
It was a big boost of confidence in the new area, knowing that some of the prior experience that we had, we could in fact bring it in with us and use that.
Yeah, and in this case, the biggest testament to what we did right was we actually brought in the biggest spotting scope we had. So at that time, you didn't even have a spotting scope.
Mm-mm.
And so I had one spotting scope. It was the Vortex Razor 27 to 60, but 85 millimeter spotting scope. And even with that thing, I still felt like I was a little undergunned.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it was the biggest one I had. And I think that type of spotting scope is kind of perfect for that hunt, the high country hunt. Anyway, we spot the deer with the binoculars, and then when you spot a deer, because it's so far away, you can't really identify the deer with the binocular, a 10 power, and so you pull out the spotting scope, zoom in on it, and then you confirm, oh, is it a buck, is it a doe, you name it. And so that's the one thing that we did do right, but that was just kind of not specific to high country. That was simply just, that's what you do with deer hunting.
Yeah, so we spotted those deer. Samong spotted those deer, pulled out, verified that there was a doe and a fawn, and then kind of just took that as a piece of information and kept moving along the trail, kept doing the same thing. It was a fairly uneventful rest of our day as we worked in the trail. We didn't spot any more deer. And then as the evening kind of came and we started getting into these closer areas of these drainages that we were thinking that we wanted to hunt, we thought, we want to get off the trail. We want to kind of gain some elevation and find a good spot to camp. And not, again, knowing or having knowledge of prior years, we were like, we got to go high as we possibly can. So we get off the trail, which the trail was running probably about 50% up the basin wall.
Yeah, and at this point, we were probably like 5.5 miles in.
Yeah. And we start bushwhacking up this left side of this basin, and we gain, I don't know, probably 1,000 feet until we get into this little basin, kind of the head of the basin where there's a little bit of a creek, a headwater, which, unbeknownst to us, we had been hiking in such steep country all day. We thought that this head of this basin was completely flat, which it was the farthest thing from completely flat. But we were like, man, this looks perfect. This is a little grassy area by a creek. We're going to throw up our tent, and we'll do that quick because then we're going to get close here to golden hour, or that perfect hour for glassing deer, for mule deer in the high country, what we thought. So we throw up our camp, throw everything up, and make a little light pack. And I look around me and I look up behind our tent, and there's about another 1,000 feet of mountainside, and it goes from this little head basin of grass ends very shortly in front of us, and then goes just to this shale slide all the way up to this high peak ridge of the mountain, which looks over into the next major valley of the wilderness. And I was thinking, that seems like a place that mule deer would be. And Samong was like, let's give it a shot.
And I said that, but in my head, I was like, I'm dead. I don't want to do it. This is a terrible idea. Think like 5.5 miles with a pack on, and we had already climbed up a significant amount of elevation off the trail, dropped off our pack, and he still wants to do another vertical climb in that one day. I was done. But I was like,
but he didn't let me know that. He just smiled and gave me the thumbs up.
I gave him the most realistic smile I could give him.
We have a buddy, Tanner, and whenever he hunts with me, he gives me a hard time because I say, he says, well, why don't we just turn here and go straight up this hill and then find the next one and go straight up that one? Because that tends to be kind of my method. However, we went straight up this hill, and it did not, at the time I thought this was kind of a bust because we saw nothing. We saw no sign of deer, obviously. We saw no sign of life. We were just in this kind of, above the alpine, even shale, rocky tops of cliffs, up even, with snow from the last summer. But looking back, that was a really valuable piece of information because for us, that knocked out about a third or a quarter of the mountaintops for the upcoming days from glassing. And that's what we were able to take back with us that evening to camp.
Yeah, the context of this country is you have the creek bottom, and then you go up to about the trail of where we were. It's pretty thick. It's just like exactly what you would think, like just some grass, some trees, like alpine perfect-esque type situation. And you get to the trailhead, and then the timber or the trees, it starts thinning out, and then it becomes more like grass more than anything. And then you go above that grass, it starts turning into just like cliffs and shale, and then it eventually goes up to like these peaks, these giant rocky mountain peaks. Mm-hmm. And so that's like what we're saying. And so when we got up there, when we were in the middle of this peak, we're like, there's probably no deer up in these rocks. Now, granted, we didn't know at the time, but yes, sometimes deer do like that stuff. But for the vast majority of the time, that is a little on the higher end of things.
Yeah. And we were up, with no vegetation in sight. There was areas in that shale kind of a little bit closer down where it was a mix of rocky with some vegetation, but we were up kind of more near the ridges and peaks. So that's what we took back with us that first night to camp, and it was a pretty exciting first night because we got down and we had a nice vantage right from outside our tent, and so we made our peak refuel meals and got our puffy jackets on, and it was starting to get really nice and cool, and the sun was starting to set, and we set up for our first real glassing session of the trip. And not too long into the glassing session, but also not too long before dark, because Samong was glassing through his spotter. Mm-hmm. He was like, dude, I got deer.
And to give context, like we're glassing like 2 miles.
Yeah.
And at first, when we first started, I'm used to glassing a lot closer to country, so I always start with binocular, which I did in this case. Mm-hmm. But I remember distinctly sitting there like 5 minutes in with the binocular, and I'm like, there ain't no way I am spotting a deer with this binocular at that range. So I threw my binos off, and I threw my tripod up in front of me, threw my spotting scope on top of me, and I just started like slowly like working across the hillside. So what I did at that time, and I didn't really know a strategy to glass that type of country, but I did it by elevation. So how I did is I put my spotting scope up, and then I went all the way to the left of that far hillside, and then I didn't go up or down. I just started going right. Like I just started panning, and when I say pan, it's like, okay, you have an image in your spotting scope. You don't move it. You look. Don't catch anything. Don't catch any movement. Don't see any deer. You pan it to the next section that you couldn't see to the right. You pause. Again, you're looking for movement, looking for deer, and then you're repeating that process until you essentially cover that one elevation band, and you can't glass anymore. Once I got to that elevation or to the end of the elevation band, I would drop my spotting scope down elevation, and then I would come back across the hillside, and I would repeat that. And I think it was my second elevation band down. So like I started right where the vegetation starts to taper out and the rocks start to meet it. That's where I started. It was a little high, hindsight. And then the more I came down, it's like I was like, oh, this looks more like a mule deer. I mean, it's like a pure mix of just some boulders and just meadow type stuff. And then I remember I came across this one hillside or this giant rock, and I looked to the right of it. I'm like, that thing looks a little weird. And so at this point, I'm on 27x. And then I zoom all the way to 60, and I'm like looking at it because in my head, I'm like, I was trying not to freak out because Nate was like right next to me, and I was like, I want to surprise him, and I want to confirm that this is a deer. And so I'm looking at it, and it was actually a forked horn. So it was a 2x2, and he was facing directly towards me in the spotting scope. But when I first saw him, his head was down. So like I didn't see his antlers. I just saw like his hump. And I'm like, that thing just doesn't look normal. Like it looks like an animal, but I can't tell because again, it's 2 miles, 60x zoom. The sun's kind of starting to taper out. And at this time, we got lucky because the sunlight was still actually hitting them. And so that's the only reason why I picked it out, because I could just tell in the sunlight the color was off with this object. And then as I'm looking at it, he finally picks his head up. And I'm like, that's a deer. And then as he picks his head up, he turns and looks like to his top right. And that's when I see like antlers. And I drop my spotting scope. I freak out. I'm like, Nate, I got a buck. I got a buck. I got a buck. And Nate's like, no way. And I'm like, dude, I got a buck. Nate runs over to me. We start freaking out. And I'm like, Nate, I guarantee you it's a buck. I saw his antlers. And sure enough, it was a forked horn. And so I'm like, Nate, like we start fist bumping. We start getting excited. Nate comes, looks in my spotting scope. Sure enough, he sees the deer. He starts freaking out. And we're just like so relieved because we're like, oh my goodness, we see deer. And the context to these high country hunts, the reason why we even have them in the first place is because I don't know the exact details, but from if I had to guess, you only get to hunt the high country in early fall because it gets snow a lot early. Mm-hmm. So once October hits, a lot of these places are inaccessible. So because it's a September hunt, you kind of have to understand what the mule deer are doing, especially the bucks. September bucks are still bachelored up for the most part. And so the moment I saw that was a buck, I told Nate, I was like, I knew he's not big. I was like, Nate, I think he's a forky horn, but he's definitely not big, but keep an eye out in that general area because he might have buddies. Because the biggest giveaway as we kept glassing this forky, I mean, we saw this forky for a good like 5 minutes before we saw anything else. Mm-hmm. And he would, every time he would feed, he would just occasionally like whip his head to the top right and look. And I'm like, Nate, I guarantee you, like he's looking at something else that's in the bush, like maybe a buddy or something.
Yeah. And this really became one of the key things taking forward every single high country hunt is whenever we spotted a deer, we would just watch that deer's line of sight to where that deer was looking.
Yes.
And many more often than not, they were looking there because there was another deer there.
Yep. And this was exactly what happened. I mean, at that time we didn't know, but another 5 minutes walks out another, I think he was like about the same size, like another forky. And I'm like, oh man, like, please don't tell me it's just a ridge of forkies, right? And so we're sitting there and like now I'm just like, Nate's still like looking because again, we're sharing a spotting scope. So I'm just like, Nate, like just, you know where to look. One step back, we didn't know where to look because in the spotting scope, I'm like, there's a white rock. In the moment I took my eyes off the spotting, I'm like, I have no idea where I'm looking on the hillside. Like everything looks the same. And so Nate and I, we took a good moment there just trying to figure out like where the deer actually was outside of the spotting scope. And then finally, after just going back and forth, we finally got it. We're like, okay, that's the rock. We marked down on Onyx to the best of our ability. And sure enough, as the sun started to go down, more deer just started funneling out. And then finally, after like what I felt like was all hope was lost, like there was like 3 or 4 forkies. And there was a really nice forky, good frame,
Big body.
And I was like, Nate, I'm trying to find a third point, but I can't find a third point. It turns out he was just a big 2-point. Like, he had no eye guards, he had no third point. And then I was like, man, Nate, I think we call that 2-point ridge, because there was 4 bucks at this point, and all of them were forkies. I think there was a spike. And then finally, Nate's like, I think you said something. You're like, no, I think there's another one coming out, because he was still in the brush. And then sure enough, as he walks out, I forgot who said it, but it was this guy that Nate ended up shooting. I'm like, Nate, I'm pretty sure that's a 3-point.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he walks out. And then I think at that point, I had my phone recording on the spotting scope. And he walks out, and I was like zoomed in, so my phone was like 5.8x, super blurry. And I'm like, Nate, I'm pretty sure that's a 3rd point. And so we actually saw his right side. And from 2 miles away with my spotting scope, I can see the small little fork. And I was like, Nate, I'm pretty sure he's a 3-point, which he was. And we start freaking out. We kind of celebrate. We cool back down. And we kind of make a game plan, because basically by the time we saw him, we essentially really had no sunlight left. Like, it was basically time to go to bed.
Yeah, it was dark. And, we knew how we'd like the hunt to work out. We were thinking, okay, the plan was, we made this grand plan. We're going to go to bed. We're going to sleep great. We're going to get up early. We're going to spot those deer again first thing in the morning. And we're going to somehow get over across this huge drainage 2 miles across the other side of this canyon and not mess up the thermals and drop thousands of feet and gain thousands of feet and find this exact rock, and they're still going to be bedded there, and we're going to shoot this deer and go home. And funny enough, generally that's how the hunt worked out, very well in our favor, but there was a lot in between. So that night we went to bed. Did not have a super restful night of sleep. We woke up the next morning, and it was in the teens, and we had both slid halfway out of the tent because the hillside was so steep. And we were in a floorless shelter, so there was a little gap between the ground and the tent, and our legs and the bottom half of our sleeping pads are outside of the tent, and our waists up were inside the tent, and our feet and sleeping bags and sleeping pads were completely frozen outside the tent. So we woke up absolutely frigid, and it was dark out and it was frosty. And so we were like, man, this is intense. Yeah, we were thinking it was September. It was 70 during the daytime. We're like, man, it can't get that cold at night. And boy, did it.
One thing I remember that night was it was extremely quiet. The high country is really quiet at night.
If it's not windy.
You don't hear anything. If there's no wind, you don't hear crickets, you don't hear birds, you hear, it was dead silent. I was like, that was the weirdest thing I've ever heard, but I guess that's just the nature of the high country. But anyway, yeah, we woke up, and I just remember, I stood up, and, my head smacked the door, the tent, and I'm like, what the heck? And so that's when I realized, dude, half my body's outside the tent. And so, when I went to do essentially a sit-up to, sit up straight, my head, just straight up smacked into the tent, the door. And I'm like, what the heck? So, you're kind of dazed. It's dark in the tent. I can't really see. And I finally, turned on the flashlight or something. I'm like, dude. I looked at Nate. He was, halfway out the tent, too. And I'm like, okay. Let's not sleep again like this, because that was a miserable night of sleep, because that was the morning, but throughout this night, I remember I would constantly have to reposition myself.
Clawing our way uphill all night long, yeah.
And so finally we woke up, and then the first thing we were going to do is we were going to relocate these bucks. And so we're like, all right, we know where the rock is, get back on it. And so we get on it, and these deer are nowhere to be found. And I'm like, dude, I don't know where these deer are. And so we sit there for a good hour, because at this point we have to clean up camp, so we have to take all our stuff. And again, it's dewy, so we laid all our stuff out to let it dry. And I told Nate, I was like, dude, we're not gonna get there until essentially the end of the day. We have no reason to rush. So I told Nate, I was like, let's just dry out all our stuff, take it easy. So we threw out all our food, threw out all our clothing, sleeping bags, sleeping pads, the tent. We just laid it out in the sunlight.
Still probably one of the most impressive yard sales to date that I've had in the high country.
Remy Warren would love us.
He would have a conniption.
Anyway, so we're sitting there as our stuff is laying out, and I remember the sun's high now, and I'm like, I don't know where these deer are. Like, we've been glassing for about 2.5 hours, I think. And then, because in my head, I'm like, they've got to be around the area, right? And then finally, I think I don't know, I forgot.
Yeah, one of us.
One of us went over to the left side, I remember, and we sat on this little ledge.
It was you.
I think,
Yeah, because I was sitting down below to the right.
Yeah, I went to the left because I was like, okay, well, obviously they're not here. Because so from our tent perspective, if you're looking at that hillside, those deer were like 80% to the right. If you said 0 to 100 from left to right, they were about 80% to the right. What they did overnight was they fed 1 mile straight in a straight elevation band to the left.
Mm-hmm.
So they're now like essentially right at the timber edge. And so they're like at 5-10% to the left, which is way farther than I would have guessed, which is why I didn't really glass there in the first 2 hours that we sat there that morning. And so finally I looked, and I'm like, there's no way I spotted. And funny enough, I didn't even spot the buck. I spotted a doe. I spotted a random doe up this little drainage, and I'm like, oh, there's a doe. Well, that kind of sucks. And then as she was like doing her thing, I just went up, and sure enough, there was 3 more white rumps, and I'm like, those have got to be the bucks. And sure enough, those were the bucks.
And this was another lesson that we took forward with us on high country trips in the years past, or in the years forward from this, is that when we spot does, we take that glass and we move it up the hill.
Yep.
Because 9 out of 10 times, when we've spotted does, the bucks had been at minimum a couple 100 feet higher than the does.
Yep. I mean, we've seen some does right at the same elevation band as some bucks, but that's like the exception. The vast majority of times that we've seen a doe, they've been at minimum 400 feet below in terms of elevation, below where the bucks are hanging out.
Yeah.
And so this was it, even because I knew that this was just coincidence that I glassed up there and I saw the doe and went up and they were standing in the open. Yeah. And so because they had completely repositioned, now we were like, I don't even know how to make a play on where they were, because originally where we spotted them the night prior on day one, it's like with where they were, there were so many little rocky outpoints that we could shoot them from. Now they're just in the middle of a meadow where you don't really have an advantage or an outcrop where you can look down into it.
Because these are just these vast one-faced mountains. It's not, we were talking in the last podcast about mule deer hunting kind of during the bear podcast where you're talking about hunting all these mini ridges that parallel each other. That's not this country. This country is, at least the side that we were glassing to. The side that we were on had a couple of these basins. The side that we were glassing to that these deer were on was basically if you took a sheet of plywood and tilted it, it's just this big, flat mountainside.
Yep. There's not a lot of structure.
There's not a lot of structure or terrain advantage to be able to try to get close to these animals.
Yep. And so the moment I relocated them, Nate came over. We confirmed it. It was the same bachelor because we saw the same deer. This deer in there as well. And I told Nate, I was like, well, worst case scenario is like we can't shoot them here. So like regardless, we're going to have to go over there. And so long story short, we had 2 game plans. And Nate was like, all right, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go all the way back to the trailhead. We're going to take the other trailhead around, which was like a 9-mile loop. And I looked at him. I was like, yeah, or we could just go straight down and straight up. And so I think we went back like a mile. And then we came across this little like avalanche chute. And it wasn't like just pure grass. I mean, there was clearly some brush in it. But I looked at it. I was like, Nate, let's just go down and go up because the 9-mile loop is way too far. Like it's going to take us way too long. And so let's just go straight down to the creek, and then we're just going to work our way up. And so that's what we did. And that turned out to be one of the most crazy things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, it was pretty grueling. And again, every single thing that we were doing this hunt, it's kind of like a baby in life. Like every single thing we did, it was our first experience. And so that's what we were creating our picture of this hunt off of, was this singular experience. Like glassing the does day one, once we saw those first does, we were thinking, okay, this is where the does are. Once we saw the first bucks, we're like, this is where the bucks are. And so every decision that we made, we did not have past hunts to base our decisions off of. We were basically just taking a dart and just throwing the dart at the dartboard. Thankfully, this hunt, we made a lot of correct decisions. But yeah, we went straight down and we went straight up, and it did not take as long, but it was a pretty hellish hike.
Yeah, I think we left camp right at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, I remember. And then we got to the creek around 11:40. So this is just dropping straight down to the creek. Took us like 2.5 hours to get down there. And then again, at this point with camp, I just remember like I was gonna die. Like I was like, dude, my body's giving out. So we got to the creek, we crossed the creek, and then luckily we found a little trail that kind of like zigzagged its way up to that ridge. And so we eventually took that trail out, and then we found this little flat bench that kind of, so if you imagine that hillside that the deer were in, where we had originally spotted those deer, if you came down a little bit, it kind of benches out a little bit. So you can stand on that point and kind of have a really close view of that face that those deer were originally feeding on.
Yeah, like a 600-yard view.
Yeah, so I was like,
closer.
So I told Nate, I was like, you know what? Like, that's where we need to be, because that's the only place we can glass within range or reasonable range to even have a play on these deer. And again, as Nate was saying, we've never been here. We don't exactly know what it looks like. So this was a complete just leap of faith here that we can get there and even see this hillside. And so sure enough, we get up there. It's like 2:30. Just absolute 2 grueling hours of straight uphill with our pack. And we get there, and I remember when I got there, I told Nate, I was like, dude, I'm not going any farther than this. Like, we're going to stay here. So luckily, it was flat enough this time where I was like, you know, we could put our tent right here. The issue with that was we were putting our tent right in front of where we last saw the deer. So it was like potentially within 300 yards, depending on what band they were going to feed in.
Yeah.
And so the question was like, are we too close?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I was like, we have no other options. It's like,
yeah, it was kind of picking the lesser of the two evils, and we made the decision that we thought was best.
Yep.
The decision we made was the thermals are going to be okay here because of the bench. The way it worked, they weren't ever going to actually blow straight up at the deer.
At least we hoped.
We hoped. And we also thought there's just two of us. We can just play it safe, be quiet, and spend the majority of our time just glassing and basically hunting from our camp.
Yeah. So essentially it's 3 o'clock. We set up camp, and we set it up right there in that little bench, and we go to glassing. So again, I remember at this point, after we set up camp, Nate was like, dude, let's just go up there and go over to where we last saw him. Let's shoot him. And at the time, I was like, yes, but because we still had a couple of days and just not knowing the country, I was for whatever reason, I just had this gut instinct where I was like, that's probably not going to work out. Granted, we don't know, but I just really had this strong gut instinct where I'm like, we just got to wait for them. Right? Because I was like, okay, well, if they were here the night before and they were over there the night before, maybe they're on some kind of pattern where they'll come back. And so we glassed there from 3 o'clock until about like 7:30. And like, this is like essentially last light. You can't really see in the binoculars. And Nate literally gets up. He says, I'm going to go use the bathroom.
I couldn't see anything anymore. Yeah.
And so as Nate goes and leaves the bathroom, I pick up all of my optics. I go back to the tent, literally just thinking like we're just going to go to sleep. And because I'm just standing there outside waiting for Nate, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to glass back up there. And so I'm throwing my binos up there. And sure enough, like in that moment, I threw the binos up in this one little clearing before it gets to the big clearing we saw him, like through like the patchy trees. I see a deer, and the deer's just standing there. And I'm like, no way, there's a deer there. So I grab my spotter, I get my spotter on it, and sure enough, it's a buck. And I'm like, no way they're coming back, just like how I envisioned them to come back. Again, this is a leap of faith that we just sat and wait. And so I look up there, I'm like, okay, this is a forky. So I'm looking, and at this point, I couldn't wait till Nate got back because I was like, I told Nate I was right. Anyway, the forky's there, he's feeding, and I could tell, and at this point, I didn't know if he was the last one or if he was the first one or the middle. I remember I looked up there, saw the deer. And I just remember he was feeding, and he kept looking behind him. I'm like, okay, he's looking behind him. He's probably got some stragglers. He eventually gets pushed out by the next buck, which the next buck that comes out is actually this guy. Mm-hmm. And I look back, and I'm like, one, I was like, confirmed. Like, he is a 3-point. Like, he's legal. And then I'm like, that is the buck that we saw. He kind of works his way out, followed by the big 2-point. I'm like, okay, confirm that is the big 2-point. And then I think there was another forky that kind of didn't come through that same pocket, came a little higher. I just saw glimpses of it. And then a new deer, which I wasn't sure at the time, came out. And I'm like, that thing looks like a 4-point. Like, but at the same time, I was like, we didn't see him the night before. It could have just been this guy. I don't know. And then you get back, because all the deer at this point, they vanish. Nate gets back, and he's like, you see anything? I was like, bro, they're back. And he couldn't believe me. Nate was like, no way. And I'm like, yeah, dude, like, be quiet, though, because they're, like, right there. Because they were probably only, like, 600 yards. Yeah. And I was like, dude, I'm not kidding you. We'll go in the tent. I'll show you the footage. The deer are back. They're working their way back. And so, sure enough, I get the footage out. And I remember you wouldn't believe me that there was a second legal buck. I was like, Nate, I think that's a different buck. I don't think that's the same one. He's a 4-point. I know he's a 4-point. But again, because it was so dim out, like my phone scope footage was not good. Like it was super grainy, super dark. And I was like, you know what? It doesn't matter. We know for sure that there was this buck up there. So we went to bed, and I'll be honest, I did not want to get up the next morning. I was so tired.
Yeah, that was each morning was a little bit of a tester.
Yeah, we popped 2 ibuprofens. I remember that.
That was, I think, my first. I was like, ibuprofen, man. This is gonna change the game for you. And he's like, what is this ibuprofen? And I gave it to you. He woke up the next day, and once you started moving, you're like, man,
yeah,
I feel really good.
If I ever have a drug problem, it's because of him.
Ibuprofen now. Okay, we're staying soft. I was excited to get up the next morning. I couldn't wait, and so I got up. Didn't see anything right away. Samong got up, and then it was just about. It wasn't too far into daylight. It was about 7:50, 8 o'clock, and we spotted the deer again. And they really had just kind of been in a timber pocket, very similar area, just right up above us, about 650 yards, and they'd worked their way back out into the open.
They were exactly where we thought they were going to be. Like, they were as open as they could be. Just for whatever reason, we didn't lay eyes on them, which I don't know if that was because it was early and we just couldn't quite make them out, or if they really were behind some stuff and they finally came out and I spotted them. But I remember I'm glassing because I'm like, I remember I brought up to Nate, or you said something. You were like, can we really see them from here? And I'm like, dude, if there's a deer here, there's no way I'm missing it. And so finally, like after like an hour 30 or something of glassing, like I put my eyes on that white rump and I look at him, and through the binos at 600 yards, I was like, that's a buck. And it actually turned out to be this guy. I glassed up this guy first thing, and I looked at him, and I just remember I looked at Nate, and I was like, Nate, I got a buck, and that's your deer. And Nate was like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I guaranteed, like, that's your deer. And he was actually with a bigger 2-point. They were both standing, like, this guy was vertical, the other one was, like, broadside, and he was looking left. And what they were actually doing was they were actually looking at a different deer at the time, which it was a spike, which we didn't even know about. And so it's about 600 yards, and it's just straight up this meadow, essentially. Avalanche chute, if you will. And at this point, I'm just like, okay, well, there's a legal deer there, obviously, but we're waiting for all these deer to step out, so that we can actually get like a good count, because we went in there, we saw 5 deer, and we're like, okay, there's 2 deer. Where are the other 3, right? And so we're sitting there, and like no deer are stepping out except for the spike. So now there's 3 out of like the 5 or 6, and I'm like, where's the other 3? And we're sitting there, and Nate's just finally like, because the idea, again, at this point, I had a tag, you had a tag, and I was adamant that there was 2 legal bucks. And so the idea was like, we're going to go up there, we're going to double. And so that's why we didn't make an initial push just to get up there right away.
Yeah, and we also didn't know whether we should wait for them to bed or wait for just try to make a quick move. What I wanted to do was the intention was probably being out of impatience. I wanted to just get up there while the thermals were good and make a move quick while we were on them, which ended up being the right decision. But knowing now, I shouldn't have done that because I wanted to get it done with and get up there. It was more because we didn't know whether, if we wait for them to bed, then we're pretty close. The thermals might shift, and it might blow them out. We also don't know if they're going to bed into thick timber. Like, we have maybe a shot at them right now. So kind of after going, we didn't see any more bucks. It was just these 3 and the 1 legal deer, which was this one. We kind of were like, okay, let's we're close to camp. Let's just basically grab the rifle and a few essentials and boogie up this hill and try to get in position.
Yeah, and I could tell like you were excited about it because I mean this is Nate's first deer, or Nate's first mule deer. So up until this point, like Nate's never killed a mule deer, and which is why I offered him the deer because when we went in, we're like whoever spots the deer gets first dib. But I was like, with him, I was like, if you want him, you can have him. And so we went up there. And if you don't know, if you wake up sleeping and you're glassing, you're sitting for like 2 hours, and then the next thing you do is hike straight up, you get tired real quick. And I remember I'm going up, and I'm like, dude, this is not fun. And even for the first time on that hunt, I looked at Nate, and Nate was like, dude, I cannot hike.
Yeah,
you were clearly struggling too.
I was sucking wind that morning really hard.
Yeah, and so how we eventually did it is, again, we're the deer in this avalanche chute, and we kind of tested the wind. The winds, they were kind of swirly, and they were pretty strong. But for the majority of the wind, the dominant wind was like it was blowing from the deer. If you were looking up at them, it was blowing from them to like our left. And so what we did was we're like, okay, we're gonna skirt this meadow. We're gonna go into like the patchy pines, and we're gonna essentially go up and get level to them, shoot them in the meadow. And so the problem I was telling Nate is Nate was shooting a Savage Axis at the time, and he had no magazine, so he was single feeding his rifle one shot at a time. And I was like, all right. If we go in that strip of pine trees, it's like you got to be alert that there might be other bucks there that we might jump, and you got to be ready for it. And so, yes, we were trying to get up there in time, but then at the same time, we were also taking our time because we didn't want to just jump a deer. And so we get up there, and sure enough, the wind is like perfect. It's like blowing in our face,
fantastic wind.
blowing in our face, and we're looking at the deer, and I range them. And I remember it was like 370 yards, and we were like on the super steep hillside, and the deer were clearly working right if you were looking at the face. So away from us, like we were looking at their rumps. And I remember I told Nate, I was like, okay, 360 yards, like that's too far. Like we need to run up to this knob in between us and the deer while they're looking away and while we have the wind. So we kind of sneak our way up there, and Nate gets up there. Like Nate essentially crawls his way up to lay flat on that little rocky knob. It's not even really a knob. It was just enough to call it a knob. And so essentially Nate was prone, but with the steepness of the angle, Nate was probably more like at a 45-degree angle, but because it was so steep, like your whole body was just leaned up against the dirt. And I had my gun, so I had my gun behind Nate just in case there was another one or we needed a backup. And so as we're getting there, this is what I was like, okay, if we would have just came here 30 minutes earlier, we would have already shot this buck in the meadow. But now because we waited, it's like they're moving off into the trees. And I just remember I sat there, I was like, dude, I might have costed Nate the deer, like the deer walking away.
I mean, like I said, like everything we did, we were doing kind of for the first time, and we were making the best decision that we could. And that was the decision we went with. But I just remember crawling, we kind of watched the deer, and for any of you guys that hunt, you know that like your quick pace of moving is usually equivalent to whatever animals you're hunting's kind of grazing pace.
Yeah.
So they were kind of grazing, and they were gaining distance as we were trying to move on them. So they were kind of working across this avalanche chute grassy area, and then there was this little ridge of tree line, and we kind of get set up on this bump, and they had worked into the trees, and all we could see was the 1-2 point.
Yeah.
We didn't see where the other ones went. We just knew that they had gone into the trees.
And this was like anywhere from 250 yards to 300 yards.
Yeah, so in range and good. And so in the 2 point, kind of made this 90-degree turn and then started feeding up the ridge, perpendicular to us. And so we were like, this is great. I mean, this is the best that we could hope for in this situation. We didn't see where the 3 point went. We knew we kind of probably went into those trees over around by where the 2 point was. So maybe he'll kind of follow the path that this 2x2 that we're watching does and work this ridge up. And so we were set up there, and we were kind of on the shale stuff. I just remember like rocks stabbing me in the stomach. It was so uncomfortable. And Samong got the camera set up, and we're watching this 2 point, and we had been watching him for quite a few minutes.
Yeah, I was like, Nate, if I say shoot him, because he was as broadside as a deer could be, and he's just like in the open.
Yeah.
But of course, as hunting goes, it's never the deer that you're trying to shoot that gives you that type of opportunity. So we're watching this 2 point like feed in and out of this one little clearing, waiting for this buck to follow suit. But we never Did.
So as we're standing there, I look down to the right of the 2-point, and I see a deer's body, and it's in a bush, and it's quartered away, but it's just a body, and so I figured it was probably another 2-point, and it takes a step, and it lifts its head up, and it was my deer. And I remember telling Samong, like, dude, he's right there, just to the right. And it took a few minutes, just a couple seconds of coordination to figure out where he was. And this is one area, looking back as a new hunter, I was really proud of myself waiting for the right moment, because there was a lot of marginal shots I could have taken as soon as I saw that 3-point, especially because he would kind of work in and out of the brush. And each time I didn't know if that would be the last time that we saw him.
Yeah, and when you first initially spotted this deer, he was actually still in front for the most part of that group of trees. And so when you said, hey, there's the deer, we literally watched him walk deeper into the trees, and he essentially vanished.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, okay, he could have just crested over it and like, this is over.
Yeah.
Right.
But I waited, and, as you'd have it, he did come back and kind of worked up as the same line of that 2-point, and he presented a good shot. I think it was like 260 some yards.
276.
276. Luckily, I did not need the magazine on my rifle. I only needed the one shot with my American whitetail, and I drilled him. It was pretty cool. I took the shot, kind of hunched up, turned downhill, and then crested away from us over this ridge. The rest of the deer went up the hill. Inside, I knew it was all good signs. Everything looked good. He ran down the hill. He didn't run up with the other deer. He hunched. He did all the good stuff, and it felt like a good shot, but had very mitigated expectations.
You just never know unless the animal's dead inside, because even, like, I was looking at the camera screen, I was filming, I couldn't even tell what happened. All I saw was the deer jumped up. It looked good, but again, I'm looking at such a small camera screen. I was simply going based off a reaction, and the advantage of filming is, like, after we kind of settled from the adrenaline of pulling a shot off, you rewatch it. And we kept rewatching it on my camera, and then finally I was able to, like, locate, like, I was like, oh, there's impact on the deer's body. And I was like, and it looked like a good shot. And shooter anticipation, Nate was kind of like, dude, I don't know, like, are you sure? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure he's dead, but I get it. So we sat there for like 20 minutes.
Yeah, and then even it took another bit of time, because this was a very steep hillside, and so it was pretty kind of tedious to get over to the area where we shot. And whether good or bad, we didn't go exactly to where I shot him, because where I shot him was kind of in a brush pocket, but we went to where I saw that he crested through an opening down the hill. And so I thought, if there's going to be blood, I'm going to be able to pick it up really quickly here, hopefully. And right when I kind of got to that spot, it was right on the crest, and we looked over, and the deer was laying probably 40 yards in front of us.
Just dead in the bare grass, man, like just in the wide open.
One of the most picturesque places.
Yeah, and so obviously, like, the deer, he was facing us, right, when he was dead?
Yeah,
he was facing us. I looked at him. Nate started hyperventilating, and I'm just like, congratulations. I told you he was a good shot, and it was awesome. We went down there, and, this guy was at his final resting place, and we just kind of sat there before we even touched him, just kind of soaking in the moment, because you look below at your feet, and there's the deer, and then you look up, and it's like the most gorgeous place you've probably ever stepped foot in. And it's like, wow, like, we just pulled this off, because, again, the context is we've never done this hunt. We always hear it's a tough hunt. Most people go there, they don't see a deer, let alone shoot a deer. The success rate is like 2%.
I think it was 3% that year.
Yeah, and then we go in, and it's like our first hunt, and we just pulled it off. I mean, granted, he's a little raghorn, but we were so proud of him, because we're like, nobody held our hand. Nobody told us what to do. We just went in there, made the best judgment to our ability at that time. And not only that, but we also acted upon our judgment, because you can sit and predict what animals are going to do, but until you actually, walk your talk, it's like you're not going to shoot an animal. And so, like, looking back at it, like, every little plan, and we still joke about it today, like, that was the most perfect hunt ever. Like, everything we wanted to happen happened.
Yeah,
the way it happened, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, it was a textbook hunt. And looking back, now that some of the physical pain of the hunt has worn away, we're kind of left with the key memories of the hunt, which the key memories of a hunt, you remember it as this just picture perfect hunt. In this beautiful place, we spot the deer the evening of day one. We respot them the morning of day two. We get over there, we respot them the evening of day two, and then we go up the morning of day three and shoot them just how you'd plan. But you forget about a lot of the indecision and unsure and 8-10 hours during the hot middle of the day where you don't see a single animal move, where you're not sure if you completely busted them out of the country or if they're just bedded in the woods. And so it was a really monumental hunt in kind of my timeline of hunting and yours too, of learning an animal that you've hunted in a new environment and making those decisions and acting on them or waiting.
Yeah. And so that was, this was like halfway in the hunt. We did not expect to tag out there, Shirley. This was day 3 of 5 or 6 that we had planned. We made quick work of the deer, and then we hiked back to camp, and then we were out of water, so we went and found this little rock that had a little puddle, and then we got our water out, and then the rest of the hunt we didn't pull anything out. We basically saw deer every day.
Mm-hmm.
I never ended up shooting a deer, but that's essentially where we're going to wrap up the story, because we packed the deer out, and then that was our high buck, at least a highlight of our high buck 2021. And that was the story of how Nate shot his first ever mule deer in a place where many people dream of shooting a deer. And a lot of people look at score, but we look at the story behind the deer, and he's meant not only a lot to Nate, but just me as well. Like it kind of validated everything I've learned about mule deer and mule deer hunting up until that point in my life, where like just you do all this research, you do all this hunting, and you learn, and then just putting it to the test in literally the most grueling, beautiful country you've ever been in, and then having it work. It was very validating that I was like, we actually did something, right? Because it's like it's one thing to just go out there, get lucky, and like, oh, right place, right time, but to be able to be like, this is what we're gonna do, and then it happens, and then this is our plan, this is what we're going to do, and then it happens, and then this is how we're going to shoot the deer, and then it happens, and it's just like, wow, like, yeah, luck's always a part of it, but a lot of that was like a conscious effort, and a conscious decision.
And a willingness to do the work to complete those decisions.
Yep.
Because the difference between saying, we should go to this side of the canyon in glass, and then if we see a deer, we can make a move on it over on the other side. The step that happens between talking about that and doing it is not easy physically.
Absolutely. Yeah. So with that's the story of our 2021 high buck Washington deer hunt. So with that said, we want to jump into kind of the lessons learned and, things that we did right and things that we would do in the future. Granted, we've kind of like touched surface level throughout the story, but one of the things that I did going into it as a complete rookie, never done it before, never even seen that country before, is knowing mule deer. You have to know, at least in my opinion, the more you can know about your prey, the better off you will be. So going in there, the one thing that I'm glad I knew was that bucks generally live higher than does, and they were still bachelored up.
Mm-hmm.
Those two nuggets of information played a big role in us actually being able to turn up a legal buck.
Yeah.
The other one is bring the biggest, baddest spotting scope you have. There's no way we would have ever seen these guys without the 85 millimeter spotting scope.
Not a chance.
Not a chance. I mean, even with the 65, I don't know if I would have spotted them. Still to this day, I look back at it, I'm like, I have no idea how I spotted that deer.
Yeah, high country mule deer hunting is one of the spots where both of us, without a question, will always grab the biggest spotting scope that we can.
And so these are just the preface things that we did right. The other thing is swapping Nate's Osprey backpack for an EXO. That was one of the best decisions I've ever did.
It gave me a little powerhouse boost.
Yes, and because I told Nate, I was like, dude, if you shoot a deer, I'm not packing out that deer by myself. You got to carry your own weight. So I lent him my EXO K3 at that time, and it made good work. On top of that, it's just having the proper gear. This story is kind of a proof that you don't need the best, baddest, newest thing, and you can still make it work. But at the same time, the more prepared, the better the gear, the better you're going to be afield.
Yeah.
Because, you shot this deer with a Savage Axis, literally one of the cheapest rifles you could buy, with the Vortex Diamondback 4-12 rifle scope, one of the cheapest rifle scopes you can buy, with a Hornady American whitetail, one of the cheapest hunting bullets you could find, right?
Yeah.
And you still made it work. But on top of that, your rifle is one thing. I mean, I'm glad I had the best optics that I had at that time. Like I brought the best optics I could afford at that time, the best binos, and then obviously my best backpack, trekking poles, having good footwear. Because I remember you said your boots were killing you.
Well, I did not have, and we talked about that in our first podcast about when we talked about the most important pieces of hunting gear, and this was a hunt where I did not have the best footwear. At the same time, not an excuse for not having good footwear. We made it work.
Yes.
Kind of to your saying, we didn't have the best of everything. We didn't have, the Dyneema super ultralight TP tent with the stove for the 15-degree nights. We had a heavy TP tent with no stove.
8-person.
An 8-person's tent that was packed a few days later with Steve, Samong, and I in the tent and no gear.
Yep.
But we made it work, and we were able to take that and refine our gear to the point now when we go on a hunt like this, we know to a T what to pack.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that, again, speaking back on what we did right, we didn't let the new facade of the hunting market get to us of like, oh, you need the best thing, you need this, or else you can't hunt. No, we did our best to gather what we could, but even though some aspects were lacking in terms of like what was the best at that time, we still, went hunting. We didn't let that be a reason why we didn't go hunting. We just said, this is the best we can do. We're gonna use what we have, and we made it work.
Yeah, and then I think another thing, this is, I think about this quite often, that was just a very eye-opening experience for me, is the difference between reading and thinking about doing a hunt like this and actually doing it is huge. Because leading up to the hunt, you do what you can in the off season to kind of live part of the hunt. And so one of the things I enjoyed doing was going online and reading various forums about high country hunting in Washington. And I have to say that it was the most discouraging thing I could have done.
Yes.
It is a bunch of, it was a bunch of write-ups by people talking about how this hunt was, nearly impossible with some of the worst weathers, without expecting it. And, unless you're going in on horses 40 miles into the backcountry and, listing out A through Z of why this is a difficult hunt, and you don't know whether they're trying to, keep it to themselves and it's a good hunt, or really you're just wasting your time with, a precious 7 days in the backcountry. And that's one thing through the years I have really learned from Samong, is that he always approaches these type of hunts with, well, we'll see. Like, who knows? Like, we'll get out there and we'll make our own opinion based off of the experience. And the experience, whether shooting the deer or not shooting the deer, was incredible.
And I remember at the start of it, Steve and Nate were so annoyed at me because they would always ask my opinion on something, and I'm like, I don't know, we'll do something. And they're like, okay, he never gives us an opinion. And because from my experience, it's like, growing up hunting, it's like hunting is so volatile. It's like it can be the best hunt, it cannot be the best hunt, and it might be drastically different from person to person. And the reason why at that time I said what I said was because I knew what was written on those forums. Because, and again, this is not to toot my own horn, but everybody has access to the forums, whether you're a first day hunter or you're 40 years into your hunting career, right? Everybody can write up a forum. Like, they can write a comment, they can make a thread. But I tell everybody I talk to, and in this case, my viewers, when you read those forums, take it with like 10 grains of salt, because the person that is writing it might have no clue what they're doing. There are people that complain how Northeast Washington turkey hunting is impossible. You come talk to me, I'll tell you it's probably one of the easiest things you can do. You go talk to another person and be like, yeah, it's probably mediocre, hit or miss. I'd probably lean towards like that, right? But I'll say it's one of the easiest, relatively speaking, to everything else I've ever done, right? And so it's like the person that is writing those comments or those threads, it matters, because not everybody is as experienced with it, right? Because very frankly, our experience could have been drastically different if we just did one or two things wrong.
If we didn't take a spotter.
Exactly. So we would have just been like, oh yeah, we went there, saw no deer.
Yeah.
Complete waste of time. Versus we had some pivotal decisions that we made right, where it led us to be like, no, this hunt has the potential to be one of the best hunts in your life, right? So again, just to touch on your topic and just to pivot off the topic a little bit, always take it with a grain of salt when you read somebody's comment on a forum, because depending on who's writing it, you can have, oh, this hunt's good, or this hunt's the best, or this hunt's terrible, or somewhere in the between. You always have to understand it, because some of the hunts where I've heard where people are like, this hunt's impossible, I've done it, I'm like, this hunt is great. Opposite on the other side, like sometimes we're like, this hunt is the best. I go there, I'm like, this is not the best hunt ever.
Yeah, for sure. No, it was a massive learning, and I think all of this is kind of what we're leading to it is go and do it for yourself and make your own opinion.
Yes.
For us, this turned out to be a hunt that we love to do, and we try to repeat it with as many different types of animals and as many different seasons as we can, this style of hunting, because it's something that we found that is just a great experience for us. It might not be for everybody. It isn't for everybody, but you also don't know unless you get to go do it. And you might just discover that it is something that you can't live without in the future.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because one of the things that I think holds a lot of people back is they feel like they're unprepared. And they might be right. You might not be as prepared as you'd like, but you don't really know whether you're prepared or not until you actually go do it. And one of the things I'm really happy, again, just to reiterate it, is we didn't let anything hold us back. We prepped to the best of our ability. We prepped to the best of our knowledge. We prepped to the best of the gear that we had. And then we went to go do it. And on this one hunt alone, we came back and we're like, refined our stuff. We refined our strategies. We refined our physical conditioning, our mental. We refined our gear, the following year. I mean, our gear from 2022 to 2021, drastically different. Instead of lugging in 8% tent, you lugged in a 1% super ultralight 1% tent. I went and bought a ultralight 1% tent. Like, we streamlined everything from this one hunt and what we learned from it. And that's the biggest thing I could tell is, like, you and I have kind of figured out what works for us. But what works for you and I today might not work for everybody. And it's probably, it won't work for everybody, right? So it's like, you can take what we have to say, but again, take what we have to say with a grain of salt as well. And you really have to learn who you are, how you like to hunt, where you like to hunt, what you like to do, in order for you to be able to fine tune your gear to your liking so that you can hunt the most effectively according to your style. And so, with that said, that's some of the lessons that we've learned on this hunt and that we did right. One thing that we did wrong, granted, this hunt, like, I'll be honest, like, we didn't do a lot wrong, was simply just your footwear. I just remember your footwear was just killing you. Luckily for me, I kind of was already kind of seasoned in that aspect, so I didn't have too much trouble with it. But the other one was water.
Yeah.
Always have a water filter of some kind, whether it's a purification tablet or a Sawyer squeeze. And in this case, don't just copy. So this is one thing. If I had to do it again and we went that hunt, we would not have the same water system. So the problem with having two of the same one, and there's pros and cons to it. The con is that after we shot Nate's buck, we came across a puddle. And with my Sawyer squeeze, we had to like dip the bag in the puddle. And what that does, it disturbs a lot of silt. And sometimes it's hard to get water in the bag because it's like you're literally filtering a puddle about 2 inches thick. Whereas if I had that, I can go to a creek, I can fill it fast. But let's say you had like Steve's MSR pump. You can simply put the hose in the puddle, just pump it, and it'll draw out water.
Yeah.
So having a different water pumping station or system can be beneficial in that aspect.
Yeah, I think, and I think we did a decent preparation as far as having. Looking back, it would have been nice to have a little bit more variety, but we were prepared in the fact that we had our filters and our purification tablets and all that, where we could have also spent more effort is understanding the importance of having accessible water sources.
Yes.
And not banking on any of the mapping software, Google Earth, Google Maps, Onyx Hunt, any of that. They will show you springs, they'll show you creeks, but not banking on the fact that those are year-round. September can be one of the driest months of the year up there, and there might not be water where it says there's going to be water.
Yeah.
And you will find out very quickly that if you don't have water, your hunt will actually just turn into a quest for water and animal, food, everything else doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And lastly, to touch on it, on food, have a variety of food. Uh, I can't tell you, especially in 2022, man, by day 4, I was like, I never want to see jerky again in my life. I don't even want to hear of the word. I don't want to see it. I don't want to smell it. I don't want anybody talking to me about jerky because I was so over it. Eating the same thing over and over and over again. At least to me, it gets to me. It's like, I want variety. Unless you're calling Jason, then yeah, just pack like 12 Cliff Bars a day and you're good. But have a variety. Like, those are the things that we did wrong that it didn't necessarily impact our hunt in terms of like killing an animal, but for our own mental sake or my own mental sake, like that's what I would have done different. And I learned from that. And then that's why nowadays, like, I can go out and do a 12-day solo hunt because I know how to pack a variety of food. And so those are just the little things that we want to touch on. And those are like kind of the first things that kind of jumped out at us from doing this hunt. And obviously when we did our other hunts, there's other things we've learned. But for this like intro to high country deer hunt, I feel like we've done a pretty good job of, tackling all the little subjects.
Absolutely. With the umbrella of just if it's something you want to do, get out there and do it.
That's right. With that said, we're going to wrap up this podcast because you know what time it is. This is Fast Facts time.
Yeah, baby.
So this is where Nate and I, we simply rapid fire a fast fact at each other, and hopefully you guys find it interesting and learn something. So I started with Trivia Duel, so you can start with Fast Facts.
Okie dokie. Well, I shared a couple weeks ago, in fact, maybe on the first podcast, I shared some statistics from the National Forest Service about people getting lost. And this is another one of those statistics. I thought it goes well in hand with the backcountry hunting. And it's not something that we touched on today about safety, but we have a podcast where we talk about safety and communication. It's the one where we tell the story of SOS Basin,
Episode
which is
1.
our 2022 high buck hunt. But safety is paramount out there. With that, according to Yosemite National Forest Search and Rescue, 11.7% of the people that they do search and rescues on for being lost get lost due to a failure to communicate their plan effectively. Second only to losing the trail, which is 16.9% cost of lost hikers. So, as I read that, basically what that means is 11.7% of the search and rescues they have are because either they said they had an ending date, or they didn't have a backup plan, or their communication device failed, or they didn't have the proper communication and end of trip plan in place with whoever they were communicating with outside that trip. And so that person then called in a search and rescue on that loved one in the backcountry.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there you go, folks. Before you head out, make sure you have a good game plan.
Yep, absolutely.
And the thing about hunting is unexpected. And sometimes you see an animal in a spot where you don't really expect you're going to go.
Mm-hmm.
That's why having a satellite phone like a Zoleo or a Garmin InReach is so important, because if you have to pivot off of, your said route, loved ones can at least still know, okay, you're safe, you're just off route. Whereas if you're just hiking, you don't really get distracted because it's just hiking through the trail.
Yeah, big difference.
Right? So very big difference there. But that is a pretty big percentage of people. 11.7 out of how many people that get outdoors, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm glad that was not a question because I would have not got that right. My fast fact has to do with an animal that's completely unrelated to high country deer. But the reason why I brought it was because I've seen a couple of these ones and they're very pretty. Butterflies. So, butterflies taste with their feet. These taste receptors are called chemoreceptors, which send signals to the butterfly's nervous system and it interprets it as taste. So the significance of this is it determines that surface that they're landing on if it's suitable for food or for laying eggs.
Interesting.
Butterflies. There you go. So next time you see a butterfly land on something, just know that it's examining that flower or whatever.
It's tasting it.
It's tasting it. Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes, sir. So,
well, folks, this was another fun talk. Hopefully you found something useful. enjoyable, entertaining out of this podcast. Thanks a ton for listening. If you want to leave a comment on the YouTube, if you're watching it on the Samong Yang Outdoors Podcast YouTube channel, that'd be awesome. Or if you're listening to it on any of the streaming platforms for podcasts, just feel free to reach out, send us an email, leave a comment, tell us something that you find interesting, and we are excited to see you guys here again next week.
That's all for us this week, folks. Appreciate you watching. See you next week.